A woman who miscarries could get 30 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Wish you would at least be honest in your own biases. So why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Well, you said
sure.
Israelis like to build. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
You can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't
questions?
frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you. I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. Today, we're going to be dissecting a classic, a quintessential example of what happens when a debater famous for his lightning-fast rhetoric and slogan-ready takedowns ventures into unfamiliar territory. Here was Shapiro, miles away from the familiar hunting grounds where he routinely eviscerates unprepared college students, suddenly finding himself across from a very different species of interviewer. Andrew Neil, a seasoned conservative journalist who actually came prepared. And it went so catastrophically wrong that even Shapiro himself later called it the worst interview of his career.
I was appropriately chided for that. I mean, I acknowledged that it was a bad interview and I acted late and I acted poorly during the interview.
You see, Shapiro, whose entire brand rests on the mantra, facts don't care about your feelings.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Had his feelings hurt so badly that he picked up his toys and stormed off.
I appreciate your time, sir.
All right,
Thank you so much.
But what transformed this routine book promotion into such a spectacular disaster? What was it about this particular interview that triggered such an epic meltdown? The answer is elegantly simple. This wasn't a debate, it was an interrogation, and Andrew Neil had done his homework.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages.
Now, we're not going to be merely rubbernecking at the wreckage, as fun as that might be. We're going to conduct a forensic investigation examining every piece of twisted metal to understand precisely how this collision occurred. And we'll map in excruciating detail the systemic dismantling of a rhetorical giant, one fallacy at a time. So, let's cook.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
To truly appreciate the carnage that follows, we must first understand the setup, because the genius of what unfolds lies entirely in the preparation. Ben Shapiro was on a promotional tour for his new book, The Right Side of History, which, and here's where the irony shines, argued for a return to civility and Judeo-Christian values to rescue Western civilization from its angry, tribalistic impulses.
This entire book is about how secular values that we all hold dear, things like freedom of speech and free markets, are actually rooted in Judeo-Christian values.
His promotion tour brought him to the BBC to have an interview with Andrew Neil. For the uninitiated, Andrew Neil isn't your garden variety cable news host. He is a journalist heavyweight, deeply researched, famously aggressive, and utterly unimpressed by media personalities.
You have no idea where I live. Just answer the question.
More crucially, though, Neil is a conservative, and the fact that he's the former editor of the Sunday Times and chairman of the conservative-leaning Spectator Group brought impeccable right-wing credentials to the table. This detail, this allegiance, changed everything. You see, Shapiro's entire defense strategy, the very operating system of his rhetorical style, depends on painting any serious challenge as an attack from the liberal media.
The Democrats in the media, they eat in the same circles, they talk to the same people. It is an absolute echo chamber.
But what happens when the person systematically taking him apart shares his political affiliation? In effect, Neil's credentials neutralize Shapiro's primary defense mechanism. He couldn't cry liberal bias. He couldn't dismiss questions as partisan attacks. Indeed, for perhaps the first time in his public career, he was forced to defend his statements on their own merits. And, as we're about to witness, he simply couldn't handle it. But before we continue, a quick question. Ever connect to public Wi-Fi and wonder who else might be watching? At coffee shops, airports, even friends' houses, your personal data is exposed to anyone tech-savvy enough to grab it. Passwords, photos, everything. This is why I use private internet access. It's a VPN that creates an encrypted tunnel for your internet connection, hiding your IP address from hackers and internet service providers. And here's what sets private internet access apart. They're the world's most transparent VPN provider. Their no-logs policy isn't just a promise, it's been proven in actual court cases and independently audited by Delaware. They literally cannot hand over your data because they don't store it. I can choose from over 91 countries as well as all 50 US states. So when Netflix says not available in your region, problem solved. It works with all major streaming services. Plus, they're one of the few VPNs that actually support peer-to-peer file sharing. But here's the best part. One subscription protects unlimited devices, literally unlimited. I've got it on my phone, my laptop, my tablet, even on my smart TV. My whole family is protected under just one account. Right now, they're offering my viewers, you, an incredible deal. 83% off, which brings it down to just $2 per month. And you get 4 extra months completely free. Plus, there's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's completely risk-free to try. And with over 300 million downloads and 24/7 support, they've earned their reputation. Go to piavpn.com/rationalityrules to get 83% off private internet access with 4 months free. Thanks.
I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
Shapiro began in his comfort zone, deploying his standard framing techniques with practiced ease.
Ben Shapiro, you're followed by millions of people online and on social media. You're one of the biggest names in American conservatism. What is it you think you're tapping into?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. One, there is actually a hunger for different ideas. The monolithic nature of the United States media is pretty evident in terms of its politics. People tend to agree on essentially the liberal point of view and increasingly a radical leftist point of view in the media. And obviously I speak in response to that. At the same time, I try to provide an honest take on the issues of the day, and that means that I am not beholden to the Republican Party, for example. It means that I am going to speak out whenever I think that a principle is being violated, just no matter who is doing the violation.
So before a single challenging question had been posed, Shapiro unleashed a rhetorical barrage. First comes the classical poisoning the well, when someone presents adverse information about someone or something before they speak or before they're heard to discredit them in advance. For example, before John speaks, you should know that he's been divorced 3 times and that he's got a drinking problem. That's exactly what Shapiro does here. By preemptively framing the entire US media landscape as a monolithic, radical leftist entity, he's discrediting any potential criticism from media sources before it can be even voiced. He's salting the earth before any criticism can take root.
The monolithic nature of the United States media is pretty evident in terms of its politics.
And by positioning himself as speaking in response to that, he casts himself as the lone voice of reason battling a corrupt establishment.
Obviously, I speak in response to that.
It's a comfortable narrative for him, albeit one built on a hasty generalization, when someone draws a broad conclusion from a limited number of examples. Like saying, I met 2 rude people from New York, so all New Yorkers must be rude. Shapiro takes whatever examples of liberal bias he's encountered and extrapolates them to encompass the entire US media ecosystem. Tens of thousands of outlets across the political spectrum, presenting them all as a singular, ideological uniform hive mind. And as for his second response,
I try to provide an honest take on the issues of the day, and that means that I am not beholden to the Republican Party, for example. It means that I am going to speak out whenever I think that a principle is being violated, just no matter who is doing the violation.
This is an appeal to personal virtue, when someone emphasizes their own moral character or integrity to make their claims seem more credible without providing actual evidence. For example, as an honest person who always tells the truth, I can assure you that this is correct. Or, I'm not like other politicians. I have principles, so you can trust what I'm saying. That's precisely what Shapiro is doing here. He's not merely presenting himself as a commentator, he positions himself as a truth teller, someone who provides an honest take.
I try to provide an honest take on the issues of the day.
and is not beholden to anyone.
And that means that I am not beholden to the Republican Party, for example.
He will speak out whenever a principle is being violated.
I am going to speak out whenever I think that a principle is being violated.
This preemptive self-aggrandizement constructs a rhetorical fortress, hoping any attack will appear as an assault on honesty and principle itself, rather than on the actual substance of his arguments. The problem for Ben, though, is that Andrew isn't and doesn't attack his principles. Rather, he tests them. After briefly touching on Shapiro's departure from Breitbart, Neil probes deeper into his claim about providing new ideas, and the exchange that follows proves remarkably telling.
I'm interested that you think there's a thought movement inside the Republican Party. I mean, haven't the Conservatives run out of ideas in America? All the new policies, the Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, the Green New Deal, they're all coming from the left, and they're popular.
Well, frankly, I'm confused by the idea that any of those are particularly new ideas. I mean, most of those ideas have been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the very earliest, or at the very latest, rather. Some of them go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. But the idea that new ideas are absent in the Republican Party is obviously untrue. We have a very strong debate that goes on inside sort of the conservative halls of intelligentsia about what is the appropriate action to take with regard to the medical system. Should global warming be considered a real threat, or should global warming be considered something that technology will solve? And if so, what are the best aspects of solving that? Now, there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism, for example, or populism versus free marketeerism.
It might not be immediately obvious, but this response is exquisite in its evasiveness. Neil asked a straightforward question: what new ideas do conservatives have? And he provided concrete examples from the left. Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, Green New Deal. These are specific, actionable policies with implementation plans.
All the new policies, the Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, the Green New Deal, they're all coming from the left.
And what was Shapiro's response? A textbook red herring, when someone introduces irrelevant information to distract from the argument at hand. That's exactly what Shapiro does here. Neil asks, what new conservative ideas do you have? And instead of answering, Shapiro pivots to, well, those liberal ideas aren't actually new.
Most of those ideas have been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the very earliest.
It's the rhetorical equivalent of someone asking, what's for breakfast? And you respond, well, breakfast isn't actually the most important meal of the day. Adding to this, when he finally attempts to address the actual question, what does he offer? He says, we have debates about what to do with the medical system. But that's not policy, is it? That's thinking about maybe having a policy.
We have a very strong debate that goes on inside sort of the conservative halls of intelligentsia about what is the appropriate action to take with regard to the medical system.
Likewise, when he says, should global warming be considered a real threat, that's not a solution, it's not a policy. It doesn't even acknowledge that the problem exists.
Should global warming be considered a real threat, or should global warming be considered something that technology will solve?
Compare Neil's examples, specific policies with names and implementation strategies, to Shapiro's response, debates, discussions, and intellectual conversations. It's the policy equivalent of having concepts of a plan.
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now.
So what we're led to believe is that conservatives are not actually doing anything. They're just thinking really hard about maybe doing something someday. The coup de grace was when Shapiro says there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism.
Now, there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism, for example.
Right. So the conservatives are just super busy debating dictionary definitions. That's not policy development. That's a philosophical seminar.
What is a woman?
What is a woman?
What is a woman?
What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
The irony cuts deep, doesn't it? Shapiro began this interview implicitly claiming that conservatives overflow with fresh ideas, but when pressed for specifics, he can only offer abstract debates, while the left presents actual legislation. A very rough start, shall we say, and Ben knows it. Having established the emptiness behind Shapiro's claims, Neil decides to test those vaunted principles under pressure. This is where the interview truly begins, and it's where Shapiro's composure starts to fracture.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics, would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages, Georgia, new abortion laws, which you are much in favor of, that a woman who miscarries could get 30 years. A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
There it is, the first defensive reflex. Notice how he doesn't answer the question, doesn't defend the policy, doesn't engage with the substance at all. Instead, he immediately attacks the questioner.
Are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
This is a straight-up ad hominem, when someone attacks the character or circumstances of an individual making an argument rather than addressing the argument itself. For example, don't listen to John's claims on climate change. He's just a high school dropout. Here, Shapiro questions whether Neil is an objective journalist, rather than addressing whether a 30-year sentence for miscarriage is extreme.
Are you an objective journalist?
But Neil's journalistic objectivity is completely irrelevant to the question at hand. The policy either is or it's not extreme, regardless of who's asking. At bedrock, Shapiro desperately wants to shift the spotlight from something uncomfortable, defending the Georgia law specifics, to a meta-debate about journalistic nature, and so he needs Neil on the defense. But Neil is a professional. He recognizes the bait and refuses to bite.
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas. So I just want to point out that I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Shapiro doubles down, constructing a straw man, when someone misrepresents or oversimplifies another person's argument to make it easier to attack. For example, you say that we should have stricter gun laws. Oh, so you just want to take everyone's guns away and leave us defenseless. That's exactly what Shapiro does here, though it becomes more obvious as the conversation goes on, and you'll see this.
When you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir. Sir, you just suggested that the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible.
But the thing is, Neil never said the pro-life position itself is brutal and terrible. He said a 30-year prison sentence for a miscarriage is regressive. Big difference. And then, of course, Shapiro followed with yet another ad hominem. I wish you would at least be honest with your own biases, presupposing both bias and dishonesty.
I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
So, in just 30 seconds, Shapiro has refused to answer a direct question and instead deployed multiple ad hominem attacks and a straw man. His entire defensive line has been breached, and he knows it. Neil, observing Shapiro's determination to derail the conversation, calmly returns to the original point. Cornered, Shapiro plays what he believes is his ace.
What I'm asking you is that why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected.
Oh boy, this is a magnificent train wreck of multiple fallacies wrapped in pseudo-authority. First, we have the classic appeal to authority, when someone accepts a claim because an authoritative figure endorses it, without considering the authority's expertise in the specific area. For instance, Einstein believed in God, so atheism must be wrong. Or, my doctor said this diet supplement works, so it must be effective for everyone. That's what Shapiro does here when he invokes science as if it were a monolithic deity that has issued unambiguous commandments.
My answer is something called science.
But here's the thing, science can tell us when unique DNA forms, when hearts begin beating, when brains develop. It cannot, however, determine when personhood begins or what moral and legal protections should apply at various developmental stages. Those remain questions of philosophy, ethics, and law. More fundamentally, Shapiro commits the fallacy of begging the question, when the conclusion of an argument is assumed in the premises. For example, the Bible is true because it says so in the Bible. Or, I'm trustworthy because I always tell the truth. The entire abortion debate centers on precisely when during gestation we can meaningfully say human life begins. Is it at conception without a nervous system? When the heart forms? When consciousness emerges? That's literally the central question under debate. But Shapiro simply declares it as a fact. Human life exists at conception. If we accept his premise, then certainly his conclusion follows. but he hasn't proven his premise. He's merely asserted it and labeled it science.
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected.
To state this all another way, by proclaiming my answer is science, Shapiro performs multiple fallacious maneuvers simultaneously. 1. Appeal to authority, treating science as a unified voice rather than a methodology. 2. Begging the question, assuming the very point being debated. 3. Oversimplification, reducing complex bioethical questions to a single sentence. And 4. Asserting without evidence. No studies, no data, just science as a shield. It's a conversation-ending cliche, designed to claim intellectual superiority without doing any intellectual work. But he's not finished. Having raised his science shield, he immediately returns to his previous attack.
Now back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not, it never has been, and you as a journalist are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the dark ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Back to the attack, now enhanced with a false dilemma, when someone presents only 2 options when more may exist. For example, you're either with us or against us in this war, or you can either support the environment or the economy, but not both. Shapiro creates, in his binary universe, only 2 possibilities. Either you embrace his scientific, hardline abortion stance that entails 30 years for a miscarriage, or you're on the left.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
The notion that a conservative like Andrew Neil might find a 30-year sentence for miscarriage extreme, well, that possibility cannot exist in Shapiro's framework. You're either in complete agreement with the Georgia law, or you're a secret leftist. No middle ground allowed. The desperation becomes increasingly evident. Shapiro has tried deflection by attacking the journalist, and failed.
Are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist? I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
He's tried shutting down debate with empty appeals to authority, and failed.
My answer is something called science.
And now he's attempting to force a political label onto his interviewer.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
And he's about to fail again. Having established that Shapiro prefers attacking him to answering questions, Neil turns up the heat by examining the titles of Shapiro's own YouTube videos.
You're a star of new media, of conservative new media. You and others on the left and the right, you position yourselves as supposed tellers of hard truths. But haven't you all just really coarsened public discourse in America and exacerbated its divisions?
You know, it's kind of odd to be hearing about me coarsening public discourse when you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir.
Ah, quite the fallacy. Tu quoque, Latin for you too. This occurs when someone deflects criticism by pointing out that the critic has done the same thing. For example, you can't tell me not to smoke, you used to smoke too. Or, how can you criticize my driving when you got a speeding ticket last month? In this case, rather than addressing Neil's legitimate question about his role in degrading public discourse, Shapiro essentially says, well, you're coarsening discourse too by calling policies brutal.
It's kind of odd to be hearing about me coarsening public discourse when you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir.
But here's the thing, whether Neil uses strong language is completely irrelevant to whether Shapiro's destroyed videos contribute to toxic public discourse. It's pure deflection. But Neil won't be deterred.
Well, maybe it's also part of your problem too, because we have from your YouTube videos Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and abortion. Is that not a kind of coarse public discourse?
Well, are those videos labeled by me?
I have no idea. But
why are you picking out? Why are you? I have a question. Why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
The defense here is remarkable. Those aren't my titles, so they don't represent me. But they're Ben's videos, aren't they? They're uploaded on his channel under his name, which he owns. It's like claiming, I didn't write my business card, so you can't judge my business by it. This sophisticated straw man combines with denying the antecedent, when someone assumes that if A leads to B, then not A leads to not B. For example, if it's raining, the ground is wet. It's not raining, therefore the ground isn't wet. But the ground could be wet from a sprinkler, a spilled bucket, or morning dew. You get the point, right? But that is what Shapiro's doing here. His implicit argument runs, if I personally titled the videos, then I'm responsible for the tone. I didn't personally title them, therefore I'm not responsible.
And why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
But this reasoning collapses under pretty basic scrutiny. His lack of direct authorship doesn't absolve him of the responsibility of the content and brand that he's built on his channel, destroying opponents. Whether he typed the titles himself or approved them, they're still his videos on his channel building his brand. From here, Shapiro's deflections grow increasingly desperate.
I mean, I hope you're having fun, by the way, going through every old tweet that I've ever sent to try and do gotcha questions. But if you'd like to have a discussion about my general philosophy or things I've done in, say, I don't know, that's 2012, so it's now 2019. If you'd like to discuss something I've done in, say, like the past 5 years, why don't we do that? How about that?
This is fascinating. Shapiro is trying to move the goalposts when someone changes the criteria for evidence or success to avoid admitting they're wrong. For instance, if the company makes profit this quarter, I'll admit the strategy works. The company makes profit, and then I say, 1 quarter doesn't mean anything, let's see a full year. Here, Shapiro is attempting to establish new rules about what evidence can be considered. Apparently, 7 years is too long ago to be relevant to understanding his character and consistency.
If you'd like to discuss something I've done in, say, like the past 5 years, why don't we do that? How about that?
But the problem is that these statements that Neil is quoting reflect fundamental worldview issues that don't typically change rapidly. And more importantly, they are directly relevant to the thesis of Shapiro's book about civil discourse. You can't write a book criticizing America's angry rhetoric while having a history of, well, angry rhetoric. So the expiration date Shapiro wants to put on his own words is nothing more than a transparent attempt to avoid accountability. Now, as a quick side note, I just want to highlight and appreciate the peculiar American habit of aggressively saying sir when annoyed. It's somehow simultaneously respectful, condescending, and adorable. It's a hell of a cocktail.
Sir?
Anyhow, Neil, undeterred by Shapiro's deflection tactics, continues presenting receipts, and it's here that Shapiro truly begins to unravel.
Your book is a criticism of how angry America is and how America has to do better. And I'm simply
I have an entire list on my website, sir. On my list, I have an entire website of dumb,
I'm
bad
simply
things
trying
that
to
I've
point
said.
out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said
Sure.
Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
Well, as I say in an article entitled, here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said.
Was that dumb?
Well, yes, that's a dumb tweet.
Finally, an admission. But Neil isn't offering easy absolution.
No, actually, it wasn't. What you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians, you went on to say.
No, it says the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian
Arab
conflict.
population is rotten to the core, you went on to say. Not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
I say that by poll numbers, they elected Hamas. They educate their children in school that Israel should be obliterated, sir.
Notice Neil's technique here. He's not cherry-picking one isolated tweet. He's demonstrating a pattern. And Shapiro's response is to double down with more generalizations about an entire population. It seems that we're witnessing the emergence of the real Ben Shapiro, not the polished media figure, but the person who wrote those tweets in the first place. This is where things become truly spectacular. Shapiro, realizing that his usual tactics have failed, decides to go nuclear.
You know, honestly, this is a giant waste of time in the sense that the entire interview is designed for you to shout slogans or old things that I've said at me. I don't see how this forwards the debate. You talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
And there it is, the moment the mask slips completely. This multi-layered personal attack represents Shapiro's total loss of composure. He deploys an ad hominem, attacking Neil personally rather than addressing the question's substance. The accusation that Neil seeks to make a quick buck constitutes a classic appeal to motive, when someone attempts to discredit an argument by claiming the person making it has ulterior motives, rather than addressing the argument itself. We see this all the time. You only support environmental regulations because you own stock in solar companies. Or she only criticizes the mayor because she wants his job. In this case, Shapiro asserts that Neil is only asking tough questions for financial gain rather than journalistic integrity.
Is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
But whether Neil makes money from the interview has absolutely nothing to do with whether Shapiro's past statements contradict his book's message. It's pure deflection, dressed up as insight. And then, to cap it all off, the claim that no one has ever heard of you serves as poisoning the well, designed to undermine Neil's credibility with viewers before they can judge the interview on its own merits.
I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
In essence, we're witnessing a tantrum. It's an utter mess. But seriously, we do need to pause here to appreciate the absurdity of what's transpired. Ben Shapiro told Andrew Neil, a man who has interviewed every British Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher, who edited the Sunday Times, who chairs Press Holdings, that no one has ever heard of you.
I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
It's just brilliant in every way. I love it.
There are not many bucks to be made on the BBC, unlike American broadcasting, Mr. Shapiro.
That British deadpan delivery. Magnificent. Neil calmly corrects Shapiro's assumption while simultaneously highlighting that he's projecting his own financial motivations onto others. But Shapiro's full meltdown has actually only just begun.
And I asked you a question, you failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't
questions?
frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
This is genuinely extraordinary. It's why, in my opinion, this interview is so infamous. Let's unpack this final collapse. First, Shapiro complaining that Neil failed to answer a single one of his questions reveals a fundamental misunderstanding.
And I asked you a question, you failed to answer a single one of mine.
Ben is the interview subject. He's being interviewed. He's not conducting the interview. It's like attending a job interview and becoming furious that the hiring manager won't answer your questions about their personal life. Second, we have the false dilemma of read and critique the book or critique me, which ignores that Neil is doing both.
If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
He's using Shapiro's past statements to examine the consistency between his written philosophy and actual behavior. And third, his repeated "I've never heard of you" isn't just an ad hominem, but also an appeal to ignorance, suggesting that Shapiro's unfamiliarity with Neil somehow renders him unqualified or irrelevant.
I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
Now, I've got to say, I have witnessed many people lose the debate, but this is the first time that I've watched someone lose an interview.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a
Then
new
why the hell
book
are you
out,
interviewing
and
me,
it's
sir?
The question, "Why the hell are you interviewing me, sir?" reveals Shapiro's complete inability to comprehend that Neil might interview him for legitimate journalistic purposes, to examine consistency between public statements and written philosophy. It seems that in Shapiro's mind, interviews exist only for fan service or ulterior motives. Finally, then comes the smackdown.
You have a
Then
new
why the hell
book
are you
out,
interviewing
and
me,
it's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that
Well, it'd be
society...
nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is... Well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book
frankly, I don't
claims
think
that
this- you know what?
society
Honestly-
is turning
honestly,
its
sir,
back on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, this,
What are
considering
those values?
considering
what are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All
Thank
right,
you so much.
And there it is. Let's call it argumentum ad exitum, taking your ball and going home. Rather than engaging with the substantive criticisms, rather than defending his positions when challenged by a skilled interviewer, Shapiro chose dramatic exit, and he does so while framing his departure as a principled stand against Neil's bad motivation, rather than what it actually is, an inability to defend his own positions.
All
thank
right.
you so
Well,
much.
thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
And that is top-tier British irony. Neil's deadpan delivery calmly educates Shapiro. He exposes how Shapiro embodies the exact anger discourse his book supposedly opposes.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse.
On this day, Shapiro lost a debate to someone who wasn't even trying to debate him. In fact, he was half asleep. Maybe we should title it, Ben Shapiro destroys the BBC schedule by leaving the interview early.
So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
All right, so what have we learned from this beautiful slow-motion catastrophe? Well, Ben Shapiro built his career on being the smartest person in the room, on destroying unprepared college students with a rapid gish gallop of talking points. His entire style depends on his opposition's inability to keep pace. But Andrew Neil wasn't an unprepared college student. He was a prepared professional journalist who had done his homework, and he systematically dismantled Shapiro's entire persona through 3 simple techniques. First, he neutralized Shapiro's primary defense. Being a conservative himself, Neil eliminated the liberal bias shield that Shapiro very regularly relies upon.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Second, he employed the quote-back method, forcing Shapiro to confront his own statements and prevent any strawman arguments from taking root.
what you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians.
And third, and most importantly, he stayed calm and persistent throughout. When Shapiro tried to derail with deflections and personal attacks, Neil simply returned to his original questions again and again.
So
Why don't you
let me
just
ask you
answer
this.
my question?
Sir?
Trapped with his usual tricks rendered useless, Shapiro's logical framework collapsed, revealing the emotional, angry, and ultimately fragile core beneath. His performance deteriorated through 3 distinct stages. It started with deflection, attempting to change subjects and attack the questioner through tu quoque and red herrings.
You're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric. Are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
When that failed, he escalated to personal attacks, resorting to insults and impugning Neil's motives with ad hominems and appeals to motive.
I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you. Is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
And when those attacks bounced off Neil's professional character, Shapiro chose complete retreat.
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer, so I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
You know, the argument ad exitum, taking his ball and going home. The ultimate irony, of course, is that a man promoting a book about returning to civil, reasoned, Judeo-Christian values devolved into a puddle of uncivil, fallacious, ad hominem-fueled rage and stormed out when asked to simply defend those very values.
So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Ultimately, this infamous interview embodies a fundamental truth. Rhetoric cannot substitute for substance. You can build a brand on destroying opponents, but eventually you'll face someone who's done their homework. And when your entire playbook only works against those who come unprepared, your intellectual kingdom isn't built on rock, but on sand. And Andrew Neil, on that day, brought the tide.
Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.